Greetings, one and all. This is Dr. Jonathan Ellerby, and I am incredibly grateful to be here with the Theosophical Society, an organization and a tradition that has actually influenced my life a great deal over the years, and I think a very important movement for the world today. So the fact that I get to be joining you with them is something very special to me. Now, if you're here, you obviously have some interest in spiritual experience. And one of the things I want to say before we even begin is that you are more of an expert on the topic of spiritual experience than you think. And I hope by the end of our time together, you will not only better understand how to think of spiritual experience in inclusive and constructive ways, but you will also be able to value your own experiences, to grow them and grow from them, and maybe even open yourself to not only understanding the types of spiritual experiences that aren't familiar to you, but that you yourself might move into some new areas of spiritual experience and encounter. Now, one might ask, who gets to talk about spiritual experiences and on what basis do I get to define these things and teach you about them? Well, of course, it must be said that at some level, every tradition will have its own perspective, and some things you have learned or been taught will be very different from what I teach. It must also be said that every person's spiritual journey is remarkably, undeniably personal. And so some things I will say may not match for you, and you can sort that out yourself. However, I've tried to present, or I'm going to present, a fairly integrative and coherent system that I think stands the test of time and will help you look across tradition, culture, psychology, and throughout history. If you're here, you probably know a little bit about my background. Um, I do have a PhD in comparative religion, so I have spent many years studying spiritual experience academically, but it's also a personal passion of mine, so I've tried to understand that in my own life and through studying with masters and mentors and teachers in different parts of the world. And that's a journey that really began when I was just a child. And as we'll discuss in a little while, um, I think most of us have quite vivid and frequent spiritual experiences as young people. However, it is society itself that very often shames us away from them or teaches them out of us or simply commands our attention elsewhere and rewards us for letting go of the true nature of the spiritual self. And yet, my experiences were so pronounced and so dramatic and so different than I guess what I thought everyone else around me was experiencing. I couldn't let them go. And I really needed to begin that lifelong search at a young age. So before we take another step, and I share my first slide, I'd love you to settle in and let's be present together. So wherever you are, assuming you're not driving a car, I'm going to ask you if you can to take just a moment with me. Sit comfortably, sit alert, and close your eyes. Taking a breath in through your nose as fully and completely as you can. Big, big breath in and then hold it. And as you hold your breath, use that moment to notice tension, tightness, distraction, breathing it out through your mouth, long and slowly. Feel yourself relax, letting go, and breathing again in through the nose, deep, deep breath in as deeply as you can, and then hold it. Notice tension, tightness, resistance. Again, anything that feels like distraction, and breathe it out long and slowly, fully. Your body settles, your mind grows quiet. You feel the stillness in yourself growing and an awareness of the stillness around you despite any noise or distraction. And I'm going to invite you to use your imagination to move deeper into this experience of centering and grounding, heart and mind opening. I'd like you to picture yourself. Just imagine, you don't have to be excellent at this, but just imagine for a moment creatively yourself standing at the top of a magnificent stairway, something truly special. That could be royal, it could be magical. Whatever comes to mind is really fine. If you can picture this in the first person, look down at that stairway. What color is it? What are the materials? Is there a sense of grandeur or mystery? What are some of the emotions that come to mind as you experience this place? And then I'm going to invite you to begin the journey down, just walking in your mind, in your imagination, one step at a time, down, down, down. With each step that you take down these beautiful stairs, you feel more calm, more connected, as though you were almost immersing yourself into a presence, wise, loving, and there at the bottom of the stairs, a beautiful doorway. Notice what that looks like as you move down the stairs, getting closer to the doorway. It's a beautiful door. You might say an enchanted door. You know there is somewhere special on the other side. You might imagine this door, its color, texture, detail, until you move down, and you're standing before it. You connect with your heart. If it helps, you can put one hand on your heart. You take a breath. And if there's a question in your life right now, you can hold that question. If there's a pain in your life or a need for help or hope or healing, you can hold that right now, for you can feel that only love and wisdom awaits you on the other side. And then when you're ready, you're going to gently allow that door to open, and it opens to a magnificent room, something sacred, something special, something magical, you might say. But most importantly, just pay attention to wherever you show up. Somewhere familiar, ancient, new, unimagined. It's okay if the images flicker in and out. You don't have to do this perfectly. Stay with the feeling, stay with the image. What is this beautiful room like that is receiving you? A place that waits for you, as it were. And you have a sense you certainly have been brought here for a reason, whether you constructed this place or not. You are here for a reason, and someone or something approaches, a wise and loving presence approaches, until you see them there in the room with you. Who is that? What is that? Familiar? Strange? Go toward that being and take a moment for that greeting, that connection. Is there honoring that needs to happen, or hugging that needs to happen, or questioning? Just let yourself meet and connect. Perhaps be thankful they came. And a simple question: What is it you most want me to know today? And then with an open mind, curious heart, just feel, hear, think, or see the reply. What is it they want you to know? Let it be simple. Don't overthink it. Don't question it. And maybe it's more of a feeling. Maybe it's a visual, something you're given. Allow yourself to receive something in this beautiful place from this very special being or person. And then when you're ready, giving thanks, seeking closure. If you have to clarify something, that's okay. But most importantly, knowing that it's time to move on, knowing that this place remains for you, this being, this person remains for you. And then when you're ready, picturing yourself leaving the room, find the door, take a moment with gratitude to depart, and then find your stairway. And as you connect with that stairway and begin the ascent back towards this day, the images will fade. Your attention will return to your body and breath. The energy and messages that you received will stay with you. And even if it was unclear, they will stay with you and unfold over time until you are more and more present in your physical space and you're ready to open your eyes. And you just notice that sense of calm that's with you. And as much as we have just taken a journey, we are now ready for a new one, which is to explore and understand the seven gateways of spiritual experience. In some way, you have just tasted one example of how we cultivate spiritual experience, and maybe even you had a spiritual experience in this very simple facilitation. So, spiritual experience. There are lots of words and terms for spiritual experiences. Some people call them aha moments, and some people call them mystical experiences, and some people call them paranormal experiences. And the language varies depending on the focus of the experience and the tradition. But ultimately, we are talking about experiences that somehow transcend the ordinary. Now, if you want to do research on this, of course, you can read my book, The Seven Gateways of Spiritual Experience. Um, that's a shameless promotion. But you can also read the wonderful work of Dr. Andrew Newberg, a neurologist who writes about the varieties of spiritual experience. And hopefully you've already heard of the classic, The Varieties of Religious Experience by William James. So these are all helpful resources. Ultimately, we are talking about experiences that feel self-validating, self-justifying, undeniably real, and in most cases, they feel more real than real life itself, and they ultimately feel like an experience of something that is beyond the ordinary mind, beyond the ordinary world. Now, there is no single type of spiritual experience, and some of us, because of the way we were raised, we have kind of narrowed our focus in how we think about what spiritual experiences are. So for some people, unless you experience the presence of God, it's not a spiritual experience. Or unless it's a paranormal experience of a ghost or a spirit, it's not a spiritual experience. Or unless it's positive and filled with love. There's all kinds of ways we can distinguish different types. And ultimately, what I've personally discerned through my own experience, studies, and research is that there's reasonably 7 primary categories of these non-ordinary, compelling experiences. Understanding the variety will help you to know what's familiar to you, will help you to understand what is different or strange to you, and will also help you to cultivate more. So let's go just really quickly through some of the principles in this slide. We're going to get on to some more interesting stuff. So today, there are sort of growing traditions, including in psychology, that would like to call spiritual experiences something more generic. STEs. I was actually at a conference on near-death experiences recently, and it was common for people researching phenomena of a spiritual nature in the field of psychology to talk about these sorts of things that we're talking about today as TSEs, transformative spiritual experiences. I don't really care what you call these things, okay? As long as you know what we're talking about. There are also a variety of ways that we access these things, and we will talk about that later as well. Spiritual experiences are very often intentionally cultivated, but more often than not, they are spontaneous and unpredictable. The more we understand the nature of spiritual experience and the 7 types on the spectrum, the more we understand about what it means to be human. And I would argue, the more we understand about the ultimate nature of reality itself. In that way, I would suggest that these are not experiences that simply reflect patterns of psychology or human design, but they actually reflect direct perceptions of other dimensions of self and life. I suppose as as we walk through these, if you find some resistance to some of the things I'm sharing or some of the types of experience, if they feel scary or foreign, I guess it's okay to think of them more symbolically, more mythically, less literally. However, I would invite you to keep an open mind and an open heart because I do believe that seeing and um, being open to the fact that these things exist not only within but also beyond ourselves is a very different way to approach things and a very powerful way to live. I think the other thing that I would say to kind of close this introduction is that um, these 7 types that we're going to talk about are consistent around the world and throughout time. So you could look at Vedic texts from thousands of years ago or spiritual self-help literature written last year. You could look at Jewish tradition, Christian tradition, Islamic tradition, indigenous tradition, Eastern traditions, you will find this spectrum is present in all of the literature. And the reason why is that even though spiritual traditions focus on some of these experiences more than others, and in some cases even reject some of these experiences, they persist around the world and throughout time because it's not a pure function of culture or psychology. We see these things because they're there. The final thing I would love for you to keep in mind and consider is that spiritual experience is the essence of the spiritual journey. Not only is it how we grow and heal, but if you look at the inception of any tradition or any great teacher, the Theosophical tradition included, you will always find a visionary or someone who had spiritual experience as their kind of mechanism to receive a new way of being and bring that to the world. So let's begin by looking at how they're important for you personally. If you can see the screen while I'm talking, you'll see kind of a list of things. I don't really want to go through the list, and if you're listening while you're watching, doing the dishes or something, maybe you can come back and look at this list at some point. What's important to know is that spiritual experience is fundamentally connected to healing and wholeness. It's connected to wholeness because spiritual experience allows us to see more parts of ourself, more parts of our universe, and to see their integration and interconnection more fully. So you might say we gain a higher perspective and context. But that higher perspective and context influences our perspective on our life experiences and our story of meaning. So sometimes we might be going through something horrible, a painful loss or a physical illness, and a moment of spiritual experience can suddenly help us to realize that maybe as terrible as this has come to feel, maybe it's not as big as we think in the vastness of a life. Or maybe we are connected emotionally to the losses of others, and ours becomes a way of participating in the human community. Or maybe we actually become grateful for whatever measure of health we have. Ultimately, spiritual experiences can shape our experience of meaning if we allow it. One of the consistent things that spiritual experience delivers is a strong sense of interrelatedness, the importance of interconnection and relationships. We feel that loving connection to life, which diminishes feelings of isolation, loneliness, or even conflict. Spiritual experience can also help us to feel our authenticity, to feel our self agency, our ability to make choices in this world, and typically opens us with curiosity, with wonder, and a sense of hope. Not all spiritual experiences are going to be a delight. There are some that can be shocking or disturbing or even confusing. But more often than not, and particularly the seven that we're talking about, they deliver some access to love and wisdom and the realization that there is such thing as a spiritual dimension to our world and a spiritual world. On a broader level, I would say that spiritual experiences are absolutely critical to understand, to talk about, to cultivate, and to live from, because very often they contain the very remedies that we seek in this world. They contain the very insights and perspectives that we need in this world today. I would argue that transformative spiritual experiences need to be a part of our human future if we're going to live in balance with each other, with our earth, and with the unseen forces of the world. So we need to begin to develop more clear language around spiritual experience, to find voice and confidence in talking about spiritual experience, and certainly normalize and integrate spiritual experience um, in conversations with colleagues, family, friends, or children. Okay, I think this is a good overview, and I would love to take the rest of our time to dive into what are the seven gateways of spiritual experience. I am putting them up for you here on the screen right now if you're looking, and we're going to walk through each one of them, and I'm going to explain both what they are in a simple summary, and also provide a little insight on what cultivates them and what do they provide or give. So, a quick summary before we go through them one by one. The first, truth and beauty. The second, ordinary magic. The third, experiences of the spirit world. The fourth, experiences of the cosmic self. The fifth, experiences of divine energy. The sixth, experiences of formless spirit. And the seventh, experiences of pure consciousness. Now, in terms of value, it's important to know that the rarity or the profundity of an experience does not determine its value. So, if we were to look at these in a more analytical or sociological way, we could certainly place them on a kind of pyramid, an inverted pyramid of frequency and impact. In other words, experiences of truth and beauty are the most common, and they're often even overlooked. So they can have a big impact, but if you don't pay attention to them, they don't have much of an impact at all. The experience of pure consciousness, on the other hand, if you think of the opposite side of the triangle or the pyramid, is the most uncommon spiritual experience. In fact, most of the time when people tell me they've had a pure consciousness experience, they're actually talking about formless spirit. The pure consciousness experience we will describe in detail later, but the point is, it is the least common we see in the literature or in uh, communities. It is the most impactful. I would argue it's literally impossible to have a pure conscious experience and not be changed for the rest of your life. And of course, everything else on the spectrum falls within the pyramid in terms of frequency. Now, we could debate some of the ones in the middle. Is divine energy maybe a little more common than cosmic self? Possibly. Some of these you might say are, again, from a sociological perspective, maybe very similar in their frequency. I don't know that we need to worry about that level of detail, but here's what's most important. Oddly and importantly, the most common experiences, I do believe, the most common experiences, I do believe, are the most important. And the reason why is that their frequency makes them more potentially powerful rather than investing your time and energy in always seeking out the highest experiences possible and finding them elusive. So I would rather that you have uh, joyful, blissful, self-aware, brief moments of connection frequently throughout your life, rather than a life that feels generally disconnected or generally frustrated or confused. And then once in a great while, you have some really dramatic experience, some really interesting and profound spiritual experience, but it doesn't last long enough or happen frequently enough to matter. So that's a very interesting principle, at least I hope you'll consider, which is that no matter how wild or wise any of these experiences sound, the most accessible, the most common are the most important. And that means you can consciously and conscientiously invest and engage in growing spiritual experience in your life today. So, the first category of spiritual experience, the first type, I call it experiences of truth and beauty. Experiences of truth and beauty are typically defined by present moment awareness and heightened senses. Now, in any of these experiences, you're going to find there's some variation, variety, and some fuzzy edges, but I'm going to share sort of the essence of each. So if you're looking at the screen, I have a picture of a cup of coffee. And the reason why I have that is that a cup of coffee is a great opportunity for a moment of truth and beauty that people often miss. Now, it could be tea, it could be water. What I'm talking about is something that you consume habitually, that you look forward to, has an impact on your emotional condition, but you often overlook because you do it every day. You do it all the time. An experience of truth and beauty might be making yourself a cup of coffee, and again, could be tea or water in the morning. But instead of doing it absent-mindedly, you bring your present moment awareness to the experience. You pay attention to the fragrances, to the shape and the luster of the cup. Maybe you're a bit prayerful in the way you prepare that. And while it's brewing or dripping or whatever it does, maybe use that as quiet time. Maybe you don't jump onto your phone or don't rush off to make your breakfast or whatever it is that distracts you while you're making that cup. And for some of us, we have had those moments where the day suddenly slows down. The scent of the coffee or the beverage somehow transports us. For a moment, we forget our worries. We might even forget that we're running late. We appreciate the color of the froth. We notice that the world outside is moving slowly and peacefully as it always does. We take that sip, we feel the warmth into the body, and we feel just an immense gratitude for being. And then you hear a text message on your phone and the whole thing disappears suddenly. Moments of truth and beauty are moments when the beauty and the truth of our world break through into ordinary settings. So you could be walking your dog, you could be gardening, you could even be at the grocery store. They are just those brief aha moments where you feel elevated. And I would argue that if you notice them, pay attention to them, cultivate them, they will feed your soul and remind you that we are living in a beautiful and interconnected world. But too often we have these moments, we don't tell anyone about it. We don't write about it. We just chalk it up to one of those things that we're grateful for, but never really think of again. So let's cultivate moments of truth and beauty, and we do that primarily through present moment awareness. That means practicing mindfulness, paying attention to the situation you're in. And let me say, in the modern world today, that means putting your phone down more often. Anytime we are distracted or something is feeding our awareness or interrupting our direct experience of the moment, it is more and more difficult to experience truth and beauty. Now, when we experience truth and beauty through present moment awareness, again, whether it's sitting down for a meal, catching a glimpse of a sunset, or having an aha moment as you lay in bed and feel gratitude for the day, usually it comes with a deep feeling of gratitude, an expanded sense of perspective, uh, a sense of resilience that these experiences are reminding us that we are not the moment we're stuck in or the life situation that we're struggling with. And ultimately, we gain some acceptance. So, experiences of truth and beauty, though they can happen so simply and so frequently, are absolutely essential to a rich spiritual life and a life of wellness and balance. Let's move on to the next. Experiences of ordinary magic, like experiences of truth and beauty, happen in ordinary settings. You're not necessarily in a meditation, you're not likely in a yoga class or at church or any kind of obvious spiritual or religious setting. Typically, experiences of ordinary magic are when ordinary life reveals something or shows you something that defies logic, defies explanation, defies conventional science. Now, spiritual science or theosophical philosophy will certainly explain these things. However, we call them ordinary magic because for the average person or in the average Western setting, these things would be considered mind-blowing mysteries. So what are examples of ordinary magic? Well, one example might be a near-death experience. Being ill is kind of an ordinary thing, and yes, sadly, uh, people are killed or their lives stop uh, because of accidents or chronic illness, and the heart and mind can stop. That's just kind of a part of being human. It's a medical phenomena that's happening all the time. But approximately 20 to 30% of those people who are briefly dying come back and have extraordinary stories to tell. Having traveled to different parts of the world during the experience, having reviewed their lives, having seen the room from above and known things that happened in the room. It's worth considering that experiences of ordinary magic also include not only the near-death experiences in terms of medical phenomena, but also radical remissions when people were given a death sentence by their physician. You only have 3 months to live, and 30 years later, they're still telling the story. Ordinary magic can also be things like synchronicities or premonitions. So the environment is ordinary, but something truly magical has occurred. A quick and sort of funny story to share with you. The other day, I had a coaching client who was getting ready for a very important job interview, had to fly to New York for it. And I sent him a note of encouragement in the morning, and sort of thinking of his generation and mine. I made a bit of a joke, and I was sending a note of encouragement, and I referenced a song by a rap artist who used to be quite popular named 50 Cent. And so you can imagine I sort of took a song and changed the words. So it was sort of like I was being a cheerleader. Go Larry, that kind of a thing. Well, Larry really loved the email. He wrote me back. Oh, I love 50 Cent. I remember him. I used to listen to him. This is really funny. Thank you for the encouragement. Larry goes off to his meeting and, very nervous and spiritual guy, of course. That's why he's meeting with me. Said that, the meeting ended really well, but he was just going down the elevator of this long executive tower, just thinking like, oh, I can't even handle the wait until I find out what's going on. This was a life-changing opportunity. And he said, if I just give me a sign, hopefully things went well. This is an absolutely true story. He walked out of the building. To the left was his hotel, and he decided to go to the right instead, just to kind of get some fresh air and calm down, walk the block. And at the end of the block, there was a crowd of people. And he asked, what's going on? Can I get through? And they said, please just wait. We're waiting for 50 Cent, the rap star, who then walked out of the building right in front of him. He took a picture of 50 Cent and sent it to me. And of course, that was his sign. So, ordinary magic for him, and a pretty improbable synchronicity that I would make that reference to someone going to a place where they don't live for a life-changing moment, looking for a sign, and it would happen like that. And yet, if you're listening closely, you know you've had those experiences yourself. We all have those moments where the license plate in front of us, or the name of the grocery checkout person, or whatever it may be, gives us this feeling that there is more design and magic in the universe than we are often paying attention to. Now, if we want to cultivate more experiences of ordinary magic, it is important to pay attention. That means you got to look for it. Now, some people would say, well, sure, you're going to start making up things. You're going to start telling yourself that you're having spiritual experiences when maybe you're not. That's debatable. The problem is if you don't pay attention, you're going to miss it. So, is there some room for exaggeration? Sure. Maybe it's not that much of a coincidence that you saw two people with umbrellas on the day it was raining. Okay. But you've got to train your mind to look for the unexpected, to be open to be mystery, to be open to be surprised, to be open and curious. If you live more like that and you look for the stories of exceptional things, you will certainly gain more evidence, and I would argue be more propense to have those experiences yourself. When we have those experiences of ordinary magic, usually it fills us with a sense of hope and wonder. We relax our grip on ordinary life a little, more curiosity, more faith. And very often people say, particularly of experiences of ordinary magic, that it reduces their sense of fear and anxiety, it reduces that desire to control life or the world. Let's move on. The next category is the spirit world. Now, this has got to be the juiciest and most complicated of all seven spiritual experiences. It's juicy and complicated because within this category, there is such a spectrum of different types of experiences. And perhaps irresponsibly, I include a huge number of things in this one category. Experiences of the spirit world are a definite departure from the first two experiences because now this is non-ordinary reality in a sense. Something is coming in that's not a synchronicity of things that are ordinary. It's not a deeper experience of things that are ordinary. It is the direct experience that there is a world of conscious beings outside this world and that we can encounter them. Now, some people will have experiences of loved ones who have passed on and yet somehow have returned to communicate with them, either in a waking vision or through a series of signs and indications, or maybe vividly in a dream. That could be an experience of the spirit world. But it would also follow that an experience of an animal that is in a strange place at a strange time when you're looking for a message could also be considered an experience of the spirit world. On the further end of the spectrum, when we look at traditions and experiences of elemental forces like the goddess of the sea or deities like Krishna or Jesus, these would also be considered spirit world experiences. In other words, they are specifically experiences of beings that have their own spiritual and energetic integrity. The spirits of the forest, the spirits of the land. Um, as I said, in the Hindu tradition, that could be Krishna, that could be Saraswati. In the Buddhist tradition, it could be the Buddha or one of the many patriarchs of the Buddhist tradition. Hopefully you get the idea. I have a couple of interesting examples to give you about the spirit world, and they come from around the time that my own dad passed away. And the first story, and I'm going to make these brief, we got lots to cover. But the first story begins after he had been diagnosed with lung and brain cancer. He was stage 4 and progressing rapidly. He was in a wheelchair, uh, already having some difficulty communicating, but still could. Still very alert and aware, could read the newspaper and things like that, but physically was deteriorating. Well, it just so happens that one night I got to thinking how sad it is that so many traditions around the world have such a rich relationship with the spirit world, and it helps them in times of distress and illness. And yet in the West, it feels like many of us have lost that. So I thought to myself, well, I'm going to pray to my grandfather. I'd never done that before, my dad's dad. And I thought, well, if my indigenous mentors can do it with their ancestors, why can't I do it with mine? So, long story short, I set up a little ceremony for myself, a little ritual prayer, talked to Grandpa and said, Grandpa, look at your son. This is the most atheistic, materialist, rational guy in the world. We need some help because he's struggling with a very difficult condition, and it's pretty obvious he's not going to have a radical remission. The next morning, close to noon, I get a phone call from my mom. I lived far from them. And she said, you're not going to believe what happened. Dad saw Grandpa. And I knew what I had done, but I couldn't even begin to understand what she was telling me. And it turns out that my dad, the rational materialist who had no use for religion or spirituality, while he was eating breakfast, had a waking vision of his father coming to him in the kitchen, effectively to say, I'm here and you're going to be okay. And it changed his emotional experience of his condition and his deterioration until the very end. I will add, interestingly, just to fast forward in the story, about a month or 2 months, pardon me, after that, my dad was now bedridden, and I had gone home to stay with my parents for those final months uh, and to help out. My mom and I were sitting outside on a late spring day, and the strangest thing happened was that above the room that he was being cared for in a hospital bed in a family kind of den, there was a peacock. A peacock in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada on a spring day. Well, there are no peacocks. I mean, this wasn't southern India. They didn't have a tropical garden in the backyard. And my mom asked me, "What do you think it means?" And I said, "Well, if tradition instructs, then this is a message from the spirit world, and he's probably going to pass in 4 days." And 4 days later, he departed. So experiences of the spirit world can be physical, they can be symbolic, but they're visceral. They feel real. It's chills up the spine. And they give us the sense that there is a world in which consciousness exists beyond the material. What potentiates the ability to have experiences of the spirit world? Well, of course, look for the experiences. That helps. Learn more about the things you might be interested in, whether it's mediumship or psychic phenomena or even angels, whatever is appropriate in your tradition. There's no need to force yourself into some um, paranormal uh, fan club that you're not going to feel comfortable in. There's always an avenue. But practicing some kind of conscientious ritual or ceremony to invite connection can be helpful. Guided imagery, like what we did at the beginning, can be helpful. In fact, some people who participated in the guided imagery at the beginning of this class may, in fact, have had a direct experience of an ancestor or a loved one who's departed. Prayer can be helpful, and again, as I say, just looking for it. Generally speaking, what we take away from these experiences is a feeling that we are guided, is a feeling that our life is more looked after than we think, that we are connected to something more than just the things we see. And very often, people who have experiences of the spirit world say that they feel a reduction in their anxiety. They don't feel loss in the same way, fear in the same way. And the meaningfulness of life and the importance of living well is enriched. Let's move on. Experiences of the cosmic self. It might seem like experiences of the cosmic self are pretty unusual. When you think of experiences of the cosmic self, think of out-of-body experiences. Think of lucid dreams. Experiences of the cosmic self are experiences of being in oneself and beyond oneself. So, in a lucid dream or an out of body experience, actually, we don't feel tethered to our bodies, but we feel that we, the real me, has moved out, that we are experiencing a cosmic dimension of who we are. Could be more energetic, could be more like yourself as a ghost. I mean, the sort of nuances aren't that critical. But what's consistent is in experience of the cosmic self, you are beyond your ordinary limitations. Dreams of flying, dreams of yourself doing impossible things, dreams of meeting great masters, visions of those things, meditations of those things. All those things are experiences in which you feel like the participant. You feel like you're in the real you, that you are the real you, but you are in a completely different and almost unlimited dimension of reality. Now, This might sound like a very unusual experience. However, it's not so unusual in the world of past life regression, hypnotherapy, as I said, lucid dreaming, meditation, near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, psychedelic experiences. Um, Cosmic self experiences are more common than you would think. Usually there is a profound lesson within that. So in an experience of cosmic self, um, while what we experience may not literally be true, it very often impacts us as symbolically true. So flying might teach us that I am more free than I think, right? Meeting a great master might actually deliver a real message to us that is valuable in this life. We may never actually physically meet that teacher, but that message is likely incredibly valuable or important. So these are worth cultivating and paying attention to. They are typically more an act of grace. Now, as we move on from the first three, you're going to find that the next four require a lot more opportunity from the spirit world, that we are much less in control of what happens. Guided imagery helps. A dream journal helps. For those of you that are interested, really cultivating and interested in lucid dreaming, and certainly meditation helps. All these experiences of the cosmic self generally cultivate a feeling of self-acceptance, connection, improve or enrich our capacity to trust and let go. And very often we feel energized by these experiences. In fact, when people have experiences of the cosmic self during an illness, it is often the turning point of the illness and the restoration of that cosmic self to the body with new insight or perspective is very often the turning point of the condition towards more energy and repair. Kind of exciting stuff, hard to predict, but definitely worth cultivating. And I would argue at a very basic level, not hard to access through guided imagery and meditation, but you've got to make a commitment. You might also think of shamanic journey work. That's an interesting field to research as a great way to access the cosmic self. Moving on now to divine energy. The experience of divine energy also exists on a very broad spectrum. So many people who are listening to this recording, maybe you, have either studied or had an experience of an energy healing treatment. Whether this is therapeutic touch or healing touch or quantum touch or Reiki, many of us today have had experiences of subtle energy. And that would be a simple experience of divine energy. Some of us, however, have had profound experiences of divine energy, maybe in a meditation, maybe in a psychedelic experience, maybe in a spontaneous vision. And typically in those settings and in those experiences, divine energy is a direct perception of the energetic dimension. So rather than seeing a tree outside the window, we might only see the vibrational essence of the tree. In the most profound divine energy experiences, we become energy ourselves. Now, there are other shades of it, and I would argue that we are all energy sensitive. When you walk into a theater and you have to pick the seat, if you remember walking into a theater, sure, you think about the view and you think about how close you are to other people, but there's also this thing about how we read the energy of the room and the place. When we go to a restaurant and we're invited to pick the table, we all have that moment where we suddenly feel like we've been given so much power and suddenly we're sensing what feels right. At some level, even simple things like how we care for our home, how we organize our office or living space, or even how we dress are all different ways we interface with energy. But experiences of divine energy are typically more pronounced. If you actually see auric fields, that's an experience of divine energy. If you see a transmission of light, that's an experience of divine energy. If something appears to be kind of glowing with energy, that would also be. And similarly, if you have a complete meditative vision of the energetic world. Do you need to use psychedelics to have some of these experiences? The answer is absolutely no. In my book, Spiritual Experience, I describe personal experiences of all 7 types of experience, and none of them involved any kind of psychedelic or anything even similar. So just to be clear. On the other hand, there is a very big movement in the modern world today, people seeking to understand consciousness and to pursue healing in ways they haven't before. And so we are seeing the increased use of things like ayahuasca medicine and ceremonies, psilocybin mushroom medicine and ceremonies. I'm not here to endorse those things. I think that's a very personal choice. I think you should consult your doctor about that, and I think those things always need to be done with incredible care, consciousness, carefulness, and intention and guidance. So I'll say that much. However, having said that, it is also true that really starting from the 1960s, most of us have been exposed to a lot of visual imagery that actually comes from the psychedelic community. So images of energy, kaleidoscopic images, fractal images, regardless of what the source of those images are, those are good examples of visualizations or depictions of divine energy. And I would argue that many of us have had those same experiences without anything unusual being required or anything medicinal. Um, so that's an important piece to cover here. And I would say that if you'd like to experience all this for yourself, go for the simpler, go for the more sustainable, go for the more personally relevant. I'd study energy work. I would study meditation. Again, guided imagery. Believe it or not, being more creative, I think, helps us access this and cultivate some kind of a regular practice. Now, in terms of the benefits of energy perception, all the benefits we've discussed in all the other categories are certainly naturally available. Perspective, resilience, letting go, connectedness. But I would say a consistent theme in perceiving the energetic dimension of the world is healing. The feeling of healing, or the ability to make healing choices, or the ability to see how someone or something might heal or require a change of energy for healing. We're going to move deeper now into formless spirit. And now we make a real departure in a couple of ways from the other types of spiritual experience. The experiences of formless spirit are, first of all, less content rich. Now, they are sentiment rich, they are emotion rich, but we don't see anything or perceive duality in any ordinary sense. So, spirit being experiences, energy experiences, cosmic self, even when it's in the imaginal realm or the spirit realm, there's a lot of stuff going on, right? So it's me and them and getting information and sometimes it's visual or auditory, but there's just stuff happening. In experiences of formless spirit, which is really what I would categorize as the classic mystical experience. I don't really use the word mystical for any of the other experiences we've talked about. We are directly perceiving a consciousness, a subtle energy, a force, a presence that is the unitive source of our reality, that is the original source of our reality. But one thing remains distinct in the formless spirit that is separated from pure consciousness, which is in the experience of formless spirit, there are a few layers or dimensions to the encounter. The first is, God, spirit, consciousness, whatever your phrasing is. God is in all things. God is all things, and God is beyond all things. God is the formless that the form comes from, which is a sentiment even in non-theistic traditions. All form is emptiness, and emptiness is form, as it is said in the Buddhist tradition. It's a very similar kind of transmission of the formless spirit. We know that whether we call it the void, or the great emptiness, the great mystery, or Holy Spirit or God, there is something more than the material world. There's something more than the physical reality we can perceive or understand. And that totality that holds it all is the formless spirit. No edges to grab, infinite and eternal. However, in the experiences of formless spirit, there is typically still a subject and an object. I am seeing it. And people will write about it. I saw things as they truly are. I saw or felt, could use that as maybe a better word. I felt the presence that is all things. I witnessed or touched or even became one with. But in formless spirit experiences, there is still an experiencer. Someone saying, wow. Someone saying, ah. And then they come back and they can talk about what they saw. In these experiences, we experience deep peace, profound faith, that there is so much more going on than we could ever know, that there's a design, a pattern. We feel trust. There's typically a shift in identity. We understand what it means when someone says, I am God, and they realize, it means God is me. It means that consciousness is me, energy is me, all things are one inside me and I in them. So there's a shift in spiritual identity, and this typically leads to a profound resilience. This is hard to cultivate, though. You can hope for this. This is really an issue of grace. This is really an issue of just showing up again and again and again. Now, in the Buddhist and other Eastern traditions like Taoism, there's really a probability factor that they are working with, and I mean that respectfully. If you meditate on this void and you surrender the dual perception again and again and again and again and again and again, and you do it every day and sometimes for hours a day, well, eventually you are going to reach this place. Eventually it's going to break through, and then you may be able to return to it if you're lucky. However, for those that are not putting in hours of meditation, surrendering the world of duality, this is going to be an issue of grace. So you can pray, you can meditate, you can practice the art of surrender, you can be contemplative in your movements, and cultivating a witness practice, the practice of observing your behavior, observing your experience, observing the phenomena that is being you. All that can help. But in the end, the only thing we can do is prepare ourselves and be available and maybe be blessed if it happens. Finally, the experience of pure consciousness. It's my favorite slide because there's nothing on it. And that's the point. In the scholastic study and the sociological and psychological study of religious experience and spiritual phenomena, this is probably the most debated and unresolved over time. And I remember when I was doing my master's and PhD studies, returning to this topic again and again. And there are many schools of thought on the nature of pure consciousness. Some argue there is no such thing. There's no such perceptive moment, and there is no such state possible for a human. It's always being filtered by human mind, everything. Others would say that we can experience it, but it is true when we come back from it, the experience is filtered by human mind. I would argue, having reviewed the literature, that typically people who say it's not possible haven't experienced it. I do believe I have. I don't know if that's fortunate or not fortunate. I do write about it in the introduction to the book, Return to the Sacred, which is a wonderful complement to spiritual experience. And what I would say is that in the experience of pure consciousness, the subject and object merge completely. When we are in formless spirit and we feel one with God, and forgive me for the faint-hearted, you might think of that being as a little more like a sexual experience. I don't know if there's a better metaphor. Probably there's a more accessible one, but I'm going to use it. You can feel a oneness with a partner, but at some level, you're pretty much always aware there's two of you. You may feel like you're becoming one together. This could be even just romantic holding or hugging, or maybe this could happen with a very intimate relationship like a child or a dog or something like that. There's certainly those moments where the boundaries dissolve, but there's usually a perceptive difference between the feeling of being one and connected and losing your capacity to even see the other, which is what happens in pure consciousness. So typically in experiences of pure consciousness, and interestingly, I was just speaking with a fellow who became a Buddhist monk in Thailand, spent 7 to 13 hours a day meditating, and he shared a similar experience. In the experience itself, one is neither asleep nor awake in any ordinary sense. We see nothing. We think nothing. There is a simple, pure, open, awakened awareness, but there is no content. There is no time. There is in some way no phenomena to comment on because there is no subject-object difference. And yet, it is not sleeping, we know. And when we come out of the experience, so to speak, we have the immediate sense that something has happened. We have almost an immediate memory that then begins to unfold its wisdom, its insight. So it's almost like we move to a kind of whole system embodiment of formless spirit, so that mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, we are dissolved into that which is the one mysterious source of all things. And in that dissolving, we lose separation. When we come out of it, it can take days, weeks, and sometimes years to fully integrate the experience, to understand the experience, to make sense of it and pass it on. Now, in the spirit of advising how do we cultivate this, I created a slide. At first, my suggestion was just to write the words good luck, but I think the word I would use is grace. This is the kind of thing we can only prepare ourselves, be available, do all the things said in all the other slides. And it's going to happen for some of us, and probably most of us it won't. And that's really okay, because one of the things we need to remember is that regardless of your practice, regardless of your aspiration, cultivating truth and beauty, cultivating ordinary magic, It's really enough for most of us. It's really essential for most of us. Now, if you want to practice more than just present moment awareness, if you'd like to have an actual spiritual tradition or a body of knowledge behind a practice to help you access these different things, I offer this for you to consider, the 12 types of spiritual practice. That is highlighted actually in the book, Return to the Sacred. I'm not here to do a deep dive on these right now, but for those of you looking at the screen, you'll see that I've divided spiritual practice into 4 categories: mind practices, heart practices, body practices, soul practices. What it means is that even though you are always a whole person, each of these practices essentially rests on one aspect of the human experience more than others. So meditation, prayer, and sacred study are all functions of a mind practice. You need intellectual capacity to do those. Whereas sacred movement, sacred sound, sacred ceremony, it's very much not about thinking at all. And even though mind practices want to get you to not thinking, body practices start with a physicality that is essential. So if you ever go to a study group, and that could be a theosophical study group, you'll have, 20 people in a room. You think you're all there for the same tradition. You think you're all believing in the same principles, but one person can't sit still, can't wait till you get up and do something. They want to know what the rituals are. Another person keeps putting their hand up and asking questions and taking notes because for them it's all mental. Another person in the same room, same tradition, wants to share their experience and ask about your experience and talk about it and be relational. That's the heart practice. It's connection. Heart practices include devotion to a teacher or tradition, um, devotion to a deity. Guru or mentorship is devotion to a living teacher, and service is devotion to one another or service of life. The soul practices are united by the assumption that we are souls on a human journey, and we want to essentially strip away everything that is not soul. So in the death practices, we contemplate death and dying, or work with death and dying. We use ascetic practices of doing without, fasting from technology and food and contact, fasting from work and civilization or whatever it might be. But usually these are practices that last a day to a handful of days. And of course, there's other types of fasting that can happen in daily life. The life practice is the one that perhaps points us towards all the spiritual experiences and all the practices, which is to see your life as a spiritual journey, to consider that all practices can lead us to the 7 spiritual experiences, and the 7 spiritual experiences can show up in any practice. And that ultimately, these categories of thought and discussion are only significant in the way they inspire and change us. It doesn't really matter which of the 7 experiences you are prone to having. It doesn't matter which you've never had. And it doesn't matter which practices you use. It's about the journey. It's about the enrichment of consciousness. It's about our capacity to love and live wisely. That is what's evolving as the evolutionary through line that all practices and experiences are pointing us back towards. So before we close, a few things that I'd like to recommend you take home to try if you haven't already picked some things out of all that I've shared. The first is to develop a spiritual experience journal. This is actually a very, very fun exercise. Try it for a month, ideally every single night. And just the way you might do a gratitude journal or a regular journal and reflect on your day, the spiritual experience journal asks you to make a note: which of the 7 experiences did you experience today? That's all. Did you have an aha moment? That brief moment of truth and beauty? Did you feel like you got a sign from the spirit world? Did you have a strange synchronicity? Did you have a strong sense of energy? Write those down, pay attention, and you'll notice that you have more of these experiences than you think, and that the more you think of them, the more you will have them. The next, more specifically, I would say there's no real substitute for good old prayer and meditation. As some have said, prayer is sending your intention, your proclamation, your wish, your intention to the universe, and meditation is listening for the answer. We really need both dimensions, the outgoing yang of prayer and the incoming yin of meditation. So cultivate a prayer and meditation practice. And then next, have a spiritual practice that's kind of your personal go-to. I just showed you 12, and maybe you have something else in mind. But from your tradition, and maybe there's some specific ones in the Theosophical tradition that speak to you, pick it as a commitment and not just something you use whenever you feel like it. So set a time every day or every week where you return to that with discipline, whether you feel like it or not, and then observe how it shapes you and affects you. Of course, you've heard me talk about guided imagery quite a bit. I think it's a very useful tool for amplifying our understanding of spiritual experience. And finally, just like being here for this teaching conscious community, find like-minded people to dialogue with, to discuss, to share, to explore, to feel, and you will find not only great support and great care and great healing, but you will also find that you potentiate each other's capacity for profound meaning, healing, and energy in everyday life. So to come to a close, I would love to thank you all for being here. I'm very grateful that you sat through this with me. Maybe you'll pick up a copy of the book, Seven Gateways of Spiritual Experience. And if you do and have questions, you can email me any day, anytime. I'd be happy to hear from you. I do host a regular gathering. Um, the time and details may change depending on when you see this. So you can just go to my site and find out when I'm hosting something. It's always free. And once again, I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank the Theosophical Society for having me. And hopefully you'll join us in a deeper dive one day and the workshop that will take us deeply into realizing, cultivating, accessing, even being able to teach and talk about the seven gateways of spiritual experience. So thank you, endless blessings, and I'll see you soon.